Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. If you're joining for the first time, my name is John Jackson. I'm also known as Attorney Somm. Recently I did a post on Instagram on my Attorney Somm page about wine collecting. That post identified 9 items to consider when collecting wine. However, given the space constraints, I wasn't really able to discuss everything I wanted to about collecting wine and had to leave a few points off the table, and I couldn't elaborate on many of the points as well. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about 12 things to consider when collecting wine, elaborating more fully on all the points, and also including my suggestions for some producers that I like to purchase, and also some vintages that I think would be good from an investment standpoint or from a personal use standpoint, depending on what your objective is. So be sure to stick around for that. The first item to consider is your goal when purchasing wine. Are you collecting for investment purposes or for personal use, or some combination of those two items? The answer to those questions will heavily dictate and influence your purchasing strategy. Of course, if you buy for personal use, the wines that you purchase still could increase in value, but if you're likely just going to be consuming them on your own, that's not necessarily going to be so important. If, however, you're purchasing for investment purposes, you're going to want to focus on the real high blue chip type wines. These would include things like first growth Bordeaux, high-end Burgundy from producers like DRC and Loire, Penfolds Grange, Vega Sicilia, some of the high-end NAPA wines, the super Tuscans such as Ornellaia and Sassicaia, and things of that nature. These are all wines with proven track records, lots of demand, and that will always be easier to sell and have a ready market available, and which also tend to appreciate in value more quickly than other wines. The second item to consider is proper storage. Proper storage is absolutely critical. Ideally, your wines would be kept at around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, which is around 12 or 13 degrees Celsius. You should also keep them in an area that doesn't get excess light or have any vibration, as those can also damage the wine. You have 2 primary options with storage. You can either store at home by building out a cellar or purchasing a standalone unit, or you can go off-site. Each of these items have pros and cons. If you're doing it at home, you'll have substantial initial expense to build out a cellar or to purchase the storage unit, but you won't have any recurring expenses, and the wine will always be readily available whenever you want it, which can be both a good thing and a bad thing. If you go off-site, you're not going to have the initial upfront expense, but you will have recurring expenses on a monthly basis indefinitely as long as you keep the storage. You will also probably need to run to the storage facility every time you want wine, or at least more regularly. So that prevents a lot of the spontaneous decisions that you can make when you're opening wine. So if you have off-site storage, that may limit your ability to be spontaneous if you're enjoying wine with friends one night and you want to grab that bottle that you're talking about. Of course, if you're building a home cellar, one thing that you should definitely consider is however much space you need, it most likely won't be enough. Everyone I speak to who's built a cellar at home, including myself, always wishes that they made it probably at least twice as big as they did. Everyone invariably runs out of space, and for my unit, for example, I have things piled up all over the floor, and it's hard for me to even get in there to get what I need to get. So that makes it challenging. So definitely make sure that you err on the side of caution and make your storage as big as you possibly can if you're doing it at home. The fourth point is to know what you like and be sure to diversify. Oftentimes people will make the mistake of starting with one region that they like and then just buying substantial quantities of that one region. But as their wine tasting progresses over the years, you discover new regions and new wines that you like, and you become exposed to new things, and then you want to get those wines as well. Your cellar is imbalanced and doesn't match your drinking preferences. That actually happened to me. I learned the hard way. For the first several years of my wine tasting career, I loaded up heavily on California wines, but then several years later, I discovered France, including Bordeaux and Rhone and Champagne, and then Italy and Spain and other regions as well. And so now I drink a wide range of wines from all over the world, but my cellar doesn't match that diversity because it's still heavily weighted in California. And speaking in terms of knowing what you like, you should also make sure that you try a lot of different wine in a lot of different regions before you start making substantial purchases. You should also be sure to taste some aged wines, because the whole point of collecting is to be able to age wines and enjoy them when they improve later on. There are some people, however, who do not like aged wines. They prefer the freshness and the vibrancy of younger wines. This is especially true for Champagne, and there's many people that I know and taste with regularly whose palates I respect who simply don't appreciate or enjoy aged champagne. On the other hand, there's people like myself and some other friends that I have who think it's one of the most amazing things in the entire world. And without having that experience yourself, you're not able to make that decision on an informed basis. The sixth tip is cellar defenders. Cellar defenders are crucial. What is a cellar defender? A cellar defender is a wine that's going to be ready to drink early on and which you can enjoy immediately so that you're not tempted to raid your cellar and plunder your stash of wines that are trying to age and improve so you can enjoy them at their peak. Examples of cellar defenders include non-vintage champagne, which could protect your vintage champagne. You could have second labels from Bordeaux producers. Lang Nebbiolo, for example, could keep you from digging into your stash of Barolo and Barbaresco that's aging. This is definitely an invaluable concept and one that's absolutely essential if you're going to be trying to age a large number of wines. Some of my favorite cellar defenders include Chateauneuf-du-Pape and also Rioja. Rioja is very good because they age it for a substantial amount of time at the winery before release, so you often get the benefit of having an aged wine even though you don't have to age it yourself. It's also a very, very compelling value. Chateauneuf-du-Pape is also a good cellar defender. I like Chateauneuf-du-Pape because this is a wine that can be enjoyed young. I enjoy it immediately on release or within the first couple years, but you can also age it, and so you have some flexibility in terms of when to open it, and it's always well received, and many people enjoy Chateauneuf-du-Pape. It's also relatively cost-friendly, and you can even find many good deals on flash sites. Some of my favorite producers of Chateauneuf-du-Pape include Domaine Pagau, or Pagot, depending on how you pronounce it. Even the family pronounces it two different ways, and so I tend to pronounce it Pagau. Of course, Beaucastel and Genasse are two other options that I enjoy as well. The seventh tip to consider is that it's oftentimes useful to buy in quantities of 3 or 6, but not 12. I still have some cases that I purchased early on that I'm still trying to work through. If you buy a case of wine from the same producer every year and you can't drink that wine for 5 or 6 years because it needs to age, by the end of that time, before you even start drinking them, you'll soon have 70, 75 bottles or so, and that's likely going to become too high a concentration in your cellar. The next item for you to consider is your time horizon. Are you impatient? How much time do you have to age the wines before you want to be able to drink them? If you have a shorter time horizon, it may be better to try to identify wines that are already aged that are in the secondary market you can enjoy more quickly. Another benefit to buying wine in the secondary market is that in many instances, they're not only ready to drink sooner, but they're also less expensive. This is especially true with wines like Bordeaux or with Penfolds Grange, or some others that have had relatively large price appreciation over the past 15 years. In many instances, you can find wine from the 2000, 2001 vintage, or even the late 90s that's both less expensive than the current releases and also pretty much ready to drink now. The next tip is to be patient. I know it's difficult to lay off those wines, and they're sitting there and readily available to be opened. Many of them are really enjoyable even when they're young, but these wines are very primary and fruit forward, and if you let them evolve and improve with age, they can develop some very intriguing tertiary notes and become far more complex. So it's definitely worth being patient and letting those wines age and evolve before you get into them too much. Of course, it is a good idea to maybe open one of the bottles early on in the first couple years or so you know what it tastes like when it's young, and you can also appreciate how it evolves over time. I would just be hesitant to do that too frequently, or you'll deprive yourself of the benefit of drinking the wines when they're at peak. Another tip is to get some cellar management software. I personally use Cellar Tracker, and I have the Corks app, which works great when I'm on the road, but it's absolutely essential to have cellar management software, because once your collection gets big, there's no way you could possibly keep track of all those things manually. It comes in particularly handy after you've been collecting for a few years. One of the things that I use it for most frequently is to run a report that's called Time to Drink Up. This will show you some of the wines that are ready to be consumed and are at the tail end of their drinking windows, before they get past prime, which is always a shame if you wait on a bottle too long. The next tip, and one I struggle with the most, is set a budget and stick to it. This is incredibly difficult because you oftentimes get presented with offers that you don't expect, and it's sometimes very difficult to avoid making additional purchases on the fly. In addition, many of the mailing lists from California and other places tend to cluster their offers, and so it's very, very difficult to say no to all of them, and you end up becoming heavily invested in one particular month when there's a lot of releases that month. Nevertheless, it is important to consider wine purchases as part of your overall financial plan to make sure that you don't spend too much on wine that it hurts some of the other categories of your life. The last tip is to go heavy in top vintages. Once you've tasted thoroughly and you know yourself and your preferences, When you get a good vintage, it's definitely worthwhile loading up on that particular vintage, especially from your favorite producers. These are the wines that tend to age better. They're also the best wines from those producers. And if you do need to sell them, they're also going to be easier to sell. So I highly recommend concentrating on top vintages whenever possible. As some examples, the 2012 vintage in Champagne is really outstanding, and so that's one to keep an eye on. Additionally, in Bordeaux, 2016 and 2018 are very strong. In Napa, 2018 is strong. In Piedmont, 2016 is exceptional, and actually throughout Italy for that matter. So definitely load up on 2016 in Italy and in Piedmont. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next one. I come out with videos like this every week. Until then, drink well.